So thank you everyone for joining us. We're here at a panel, which I am moderating at the last minute, filling in for Laura Shin. So I'm a poor substitute for her. She's taken ill. And my name is Brian Klein. I'm a litigator in the space. I'm based in Los Angeles. Just by a quick way of background, I represent a lot of companies and individuals in the space. I represented Block One in their SEC settlement. I represent Virgil Griffin in his case in the Southern District of New York. He's being prosecuted for allegedly violating sanctions in connection with North Korea. I represent a number of other players in the space, both in civil, regulatory, and criminal defense. I'm excited to fill in for Laura today and introduce everybody to the panelists. And frankly, I'm coming at this topic as fresh as everybody else because I'm filling at the last minute. So my questions will be very genuine when I'm asking them about what's going on. Why don't we start, Zach Siegel? Why don't you let everybody know who you are and what you're working on?
Thanks, Brian. My name is Zach, and I'm at Coinbase heading up our new listings program. So that's the program that evaluates all of the different cryptocurrencies that exist for potential listing across our suite of products at Coinbase. Everything from our custody platform to our professional exchange to our retail brokerage. I've been at Coinbase for about 2 years and joined after it acquired Earn.com, where I was formerly at and worked on product management and marketing.
Thanks, Zach. And then I'll do the other Zach just to make it confusing. We'll just do two Zach. Zach, why don't you tell us?
Yeah, anything I say wrong, it's attributable to that Zach and not this Zach. I'm Zach Fallon. I am a partner or principal at Quetzal, a consulting and law firm. We are, I think we started out in 2018 with a focus on cryptocurrency and blockchain related issues. We have a much broader experience in generally with securities laws, money transmission, banking and payments related issues, and general VC type corporate issues. So our practice here is broad, but also focused enough in this space to have some good experience with a lot of clients working in this space over the last few years. Prior to joining Quetzal, I was at the Securities and Exchange Commission for 9 years. Again, I left in 2018. I was part of the Office of the General Counsel there, and later joined the Division of Corporation Finance and worked quite heavily on a lot of the Jobs Act related rulemakings, including crowdfunding and Regulation A, 506C, all of the exempt offerings which have come up for a number of different reasons in this space over the last few years. So I'm very familiar with those issues and happy to be here. Anyway, I'll pass on to Andy, perhaps.
Sure thing. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Andi Bromberg. I'm one of the founders and the president of CoinList. And CoinList is the platform where the best digital assets run their token sale, now also where they trade. And we're rolling out a more advanced exchange in the coming months. But historically, we've been the place where the best projects run token sales, from Filecoin to Blockstack, Algorand, Nervos, Solana, and most recently Celo, and a number of others. And yeah, really excited to be here.
I have a lot of questions because I've represented a lot of people who had regulators look at them, whether the SEC or state regulators, for things that happened really during the boom years of 2017, some before, and post Dow report, sort of post that flurry of SEC investigations. I know how things come to market or how tokens get distributed initially has really changed. And I guess we'd start maybe, Zach, with you, Siegel, again. Talk about sort of what you see was different from then to what you see is different today. Because I know things have changed dramatically. Particularly, there's groups looking at things, evaluating things, and the approach. Time Coinbase, I think, only listed maybe Bitcoin and Ethereum, even maybe not even Ethereum initially. But since it's expanded its offerings tremendously, so why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So in 2018, when I joined Coinbase, we supported 4 assets. Since then, we've added more than 50 across all of our different platforms. and things have changed a lot. I think number one is we're seeing sort of this broader shift from proof of work coins to now proof of stake coins, which are interesting in a number of different ways. I would say that a number of projects that attracted a lot of interest from some of the most respected, investment firms in 2017 are just now getting ready to launch. And I think it's a really exciting time because each of these projects represents sort of a step function change in terms of what cryptocurrency as a platform can do. And so you're seeing projects now that are launching, which either go after scalability challenges that older platforms have faced, interoperability challenges, and even some other sort of unique utility plays, which are now only possible thanks to some improvements in recent technology. And I think it's an exciting time because we're seeing a lot of interest, I think, both on the institutional side and also on the retail side to support these assets. So speaking to each of those real briefly, on the institutional side, what we're seeing is huge demand for what we call network integrations. And these are projects where we are supporting them really at the Genesis block. And we do that on our custody platform. And so as soon as those assets are being issued, often they're being issued directly into those early purchasers' wallets, which are on Coinbase Custody Trust Company, which is a New York Department of Financial Services regulated trust company. And the other sort of trends we're noticing is just much more in the way of active participation on the institutional side. So everything from staking to governance, these are things that we've really leaned into heavily recently with projects like Cosmos and Tezos on the staking side, and MakerDAO and Compound on the governance side, for example. And this, I think, is just something that is going to become sort of baseline requirements on the custody side. And then, so that's sort of some of the trends we're seeing on the institutional side. Switching to more of the retail side, I think that it's really interesting because a lot of these networks are giving the sort of retail audience a taste at what's possible due to some of these new innovations that are just now rolling out in terms of scalability and transaction throughput, file storage, that the retail audience is excited about in terms of what platforms are going to be able to start to be built on top of these new networks. And so across the board, we're seeing strong demand from our customers to add these assets, and we're increasingly supporting them closer to their network launch, which has a lot of sort of unique challenges and requirements that happy to get into later.
Why don't you talk about sort of your perspective? I know what CoinList does. I think I participated in the Filecoin sale, so I used CoinList. Why don't you tell what CoinList is seeing now? I know you come at this from a different angle than Coinbase, although similar in many respects.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, first of all, I'd echo a lot of what Zach had to say there. That one of the most exciting things is a lot of these projects that started raising money back in 2017 are now going live, and so you're actually seeing. A lot of people talked about in 2017 these projects coming to market, but really they were only coming to market to fundraise. They weren't actually launching yet, and they weren't actually distributing tokens to people's hands. And what we're seeing now in 2019, 2020, 2021 is these projects launching, distributing tokens, and all the second order effects that come from that afterwards. But before even thinking about how it's changing, how these projects come to market, you have to think about which projects are coming to market. And I would say the biggest difference is that in 2017, it was mostly garbage. There were thousands of projects launching in 2017. Nearly all of them were bad. And there were a few diamonds in the rough that you could pay attention to. And now I think what we've seen is a real shakeout in the space, and the signal to noise ratio has gotten a lot better. And so you're seeing a much higher percentage of the projects that go out and raise money or launch today are, maybe they won't be massively successful. It's hard to say, but they're at least viable and not fraudulent, not scams, not kind of just pure cash grabs like a lot of what we saw in 2017. So I think that's honestly the biggest difference. You know, in the first year or so of CoinList's existence, we saw almost 4,000 projects approach us and say, we want you to run our token sale. And we worked with maybe a half dozen of them over that time. And now we see a much more manageable inbound. We're still just as selective as we were before, but it's out of hundreds instead of thousands now. And so you're seeing a real shift in what projects come to market. And a big part of that is because investors are getting way more sophisticated. And so the bad projects aren't able to raise money. And it's not even worth giving it a shot now if you're a scammy project. So we see that ratio change. Yeah.
I may disagree with you on a lot of the projects. There were a number of good projects in 2017, but I hear your point that there were just a lot of projects launching in 2017. It's different. When you say you look at things that are quality, or you see more quality projects, what are you defining as a quality project? What are the metrics you look at to say this is that we can put our name behind and get involved with?
It's a really good question, and obviously a little bit of a kind of slippery question is quality, off debated in all sorts of circles. And to really simplify it for us, we look at a few criteria: the team, the product they're building, the market they're serving, the deal terms they're offering it at, the legal structure of the project, how they're approaching whatever regulatory issues they might have to face based on how they're structuring it. And then the last and maybe most interesting category, because that first set is at some level kind of table stakes if you're investing in anything early, whether it's a token or a seed stage investment in a company, team, product, market, deal terms, legal structure, great. That all makes sense. The last piece is what we call the token economics. And I'd really put that in two subcategories. And one of them is, if the network is successful that is launching, is there a viable path to value accrual for the token? So if the network, the product these people are building and will become a decentralized network, if it is massive and reaches a huge audience and is used for its intended purpose, will value actually accrue to the token? Because you can imagine a world where a network is wildly successful, but no value accrues to the token. And so does that really make a lot of sense for that token to exist and be purchased by people? Well, you can ask that. And the second piece, aside from the value accrual mechanism for a token project, is the incentive structure. And this is something that I think is underappreciated and also so core to what crypto is. When you're building decentralized networks, by definition, it means that there's no longer a central party to control the actors in the network or to incentivize or disincentivize them. So if you think about any centralized company, Airbnb, right? Not that there's anything wrong with them, but that's a central entity that incentivizes and disincentivizes people to behave in a certain way on the network. They pay people, they kick people off the platform. They actually kind of moderate the platform. In a decentralized network, you don't have that. There's no party that's doling out punishments and rewards. And so the incentives and disincentives within the protocol itself need to be sufficiently powerful to make sure that the good actors are doing what needs to be done on the network, and the bad actors are appropriately disincentivized from attacking the network. And so that's a really hard thing to figure out. And again, to your point, it's not like a checkbox where you're like, okay, great, this thing has good token economic model, this one doesn't. It's a really kind of qualitative judgment at some level, but I think it's what you have to do to get into quality. So yeah, to directly address your question: team, product, market, deal terms, legal structure, and then this kind of big nebulous field of token economics, and making sure that it seems like a project that could be successful in the long run.
Zach Fallon, I'm going to ask you to chime in. Now you've heard from the industry players, and you're like me, you're outside counsel, but we serve different roles. I don't give opinions, I defend them. And you're more in the role of giving opinions and working with these companies to interact with Coinbases and CoinList. What are you seeing from the clients that are approaching you now with token distribution they want to conduct, or whatever they want to call it, launch a network? What are the things you're seeing, the trends you're seeing right now?
Yeah, I mean, so there's been a definite drop in demand for new token issuances, so far as I've seen, in the vein of the 2017 type companies. I think a lot of the lessons learned over the last few years are starting to sink in with market participants. A lot of the guidance that's come out from the commission, a lot of the opinions, the learning that happens through experience of navigating these issues in real time, and the risks and the sort of the weight that bears down on founders who are flush with cash, with an inability to distribute tokens, and without really necessarily products with many of the coin offerings at that time. So I think people are, what we're seeing now are smaller issuances, people looking to people willing to build with the regulatory framework in mind, whether that means to navigate out of it or to embrace it. And so, it was frustrating for us in the early days. I think so someone's getting some feedback, Brian. I don't know if it's your mic. Sorry.
I'm hearing it on yours, but I'll turn mine off.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry. If that continues, let me know on the comments. But so what was I gonna say? Oh, in the early days of our practice, a lot of the sort of the calls to caution that we would issue on the front end, and you mentioned, Brian, you come in on the back end of these issues oftentimes, it was difficult in the absence of guidance from the commission, but really, having internal knowledge of how that works to guide companies to a place of compliance from the get-go in those early days. That time has passed, and now thankfully, the clients who come to us are more willing to embrace the regulatory framework, and as I said, address those issues as they build. So we're definitely seeing that, people willing to have a product before they launch, or not necessarily raise capital to build a network, but to launch or to raise capital in a more traditional route, and then to distribute tokens that actually have a utility, and to ask themselves the important questions is, do we really need a token that fluctuates in value, or a digital asset that fluctuates in value? And what is the purpose of that speculation, and how important is it to drive our network adoption? So there's a lot of questions that we can, when we come in from the front end, we can help to frame out what is this product ultimately that you're trying to build, and let's walk through the issues as you're building, rather than a lot of what we saw in 2018, where companies coming to us, in triage mode, looking to sort of solve a problem that has already happened, that is very difficult to do post hoc after you've raised millions of dollars through the sale of an asset that in many ways look like a security. So I think we're seeing more measured growth, more measured building, and that's the benefit of hindsight is helping a lot of companies in the space. It's also, I think, that sort of the overlay of the taint of the last few years, if you will, of all the regulatory backlash, has, I think, dissuaded some people from entering the space, and that's not necessarily a bad thing either, because you want people who really believe in the core of what the decentralization movement is about, and are willing to sort of embrace the realities, the regulatory realities of building within the space, to sort of be the ones that stick around. So I think that's starting to happen, but there's definitely been, there was a boom, and then there was a bust, and it's sort of, now things are sort of settling out a bit, and people are starting to come back into the space with better views, I think, ultimately.
There's a question that's asked that was frankly one I was going to ask, which is, when you're looking at token projects, and it's hard when maybe it's a little different for Coinbase than CoinList, but when you think about, like, how are people or companies actually using this token? Like, with proof of stake, you might say, well, a lot of people are using it, but they're using it to stake it, right? Are people, and maybe what's its purpose, and are people using it? That Zach Siegel, how do you look at that? Does that factor into what you're looking at when you look at a token, and whether you're going to hold it in custody or allow people to stake it? What metrics do you look at for use?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it depends on what platform we're going to list a cryptocurrency on. So we, for the purposes of adding assets, we have custody, and then we have our trading platforms, Pro, and then our consumer brokerage. And the regulatory sort of constraints on each of those products are different. And the assets that you can add on each of those products are different. And that's mostly driven by the fact that with custody, you are effectively just safekeeping that asset for someone. Whereas with trading, it just implicates a lot of other sort of regulatory concerns. And so generally speaking, what you end up with is a larger number of assets on the custody platform, which today we have over 50. And then of that, a subset make it onto the trading platform. One thing that we've done in the evolution of our listing program is come up with a very objective and scalable framework for evaluating these assets. And usage and utility are really core components of that framework. And in terms of what sort of measurements there are, it really varies by asset, because it depends. Number one, what is the purpose of the network, right? And then two is on that network, what is this token supposed to be used for on that network? There are ways that you can track this, and in fact, there are companies that are specializing in specifically looking at on-chain activity. And
who are some of those companies, just so people know? They have public-facing websites.
Yeah, one that comes to mind is Flipside Crypto. That's a Coinbase Ventures portfolio company that we invested in some time ago. Masari, I think, does this to some extent. I think, though, less about tracking on-chain data and more about the project. In terms of, I think that just unpacking this question a little deeper, in going back to how do we evaluate which assets might be higher risk or lower risk to list on the exchange, because that is where there is more risk. There's a few things to unpack there. One is that there's just different considerations in terms of where we list the asset, right? So securities laws are not uniform, and what we might be able to list in the United States is different than what we might be able to list in other countries in the world. And so we've designed our framework to be flexible to allow for that. But going a step further in terms of the actual due diligence, there's a few things that matter here of the risk. And so we've now reviewed dozens of projects. We were one of the founding members of the Crypto Rating Council, whose purpose is to objectively look at the facts of a given asset or network and determine the likelihood that securities laws would be implicated for that asset. And some of the most important considerations that are looked for in that process are, number one, what's the sort of current status of the network, right? Is it not launched at all? Is it on a test net, or is it on a mainnet? Because if it's not, then obviously there's going to be much more reliance on the efforts of others to build out that network, which is a really, it's one of the 4 Howey prongs, and so it matters a lot. The other is, project teams will often communicate out what the roadmap is, and not having that roadmap fully built out, and let's say only having 1 of 4 sort of core features that were described in that project, in the white paper and marketing materials, is also really important, right? Because it also increases the efforts of others. I think another sort of key consideration is the language that's used in describing the product, and this is something that in recent SEC enforcement actions you've seen is how the project is characterized, and the more sort of investment-like language that's used, the more likely the SEC is going to see that project as a security. And then I think the 4th consideration to this might be how much total capital is raised for the project, and whether or not that's sort of commensurate with the actual sort of intended use of the project, both using it and also building it out, right? So the sort of less that's raised, generally speaking, the more the less likely it is to implicate certain of those regulatory considerations. But those are four of the things that go into factors that lead to higher scores, generally speaking.
And Andy, for you, are you looking at? I know you can speculate about what usage may be before it's launched. Do you ever go back and look at, like, do a post hoc thing and say, hey, we thought this was a great project, and now let's look at what actually happened after it launched? I mean, do you, and then sort of adjust your model, or how are you looking at usage at all? Because usually it's after you've done your sale, maybe way later.
Oh yeah, I mean, always evaluating and iterating and working on improving the process. Absolutely, worth noting that many of the projects that we worked with, as I mentioned earlier, are launching this year or next year. Although there are some that are live. And yeah, again, I would echo again some of what Zach said, which is what usage is varies wildly network to network, and in certain cases, and again, this is it's a tough line to draw, but it's something that you have to be doing if you're making these sorts of evaluations. In some cases, I'll give an example. The term staking, I think, is used very broadly in this industry to mean a whole bunch of different things. And at its most basic level, what all of these, or nearly all of these types of staking have to do with each other is it involves a user taking some tokens and locking them up somehow, bonding them, escrowing them, staking them, whatever word you want to use, and something happening as a result. That's basically the only commonality that all of these different staking implementations have. And for some of these staking implementations, that is actually directly tied to usage. So people who are staking tokens are actually doing some other service for the network and have to stake tokens in order to be performing that service. And so in that case, you can look at staked tokens and say, that's a really good proxy for some sort of very tangible usage. These people are performing some sort of computation on the network, or they're providing some other direct usage-based service to the network. And in other cases, the term staking is used basically just to mean yield generation, that you lock tokens up and you get a reward as a result for really doing nothing other than just locking your tokens up. And so you can argue then, well, is that really usage? Does that have to do with what this network is meant to be used for? That's not to say that it's a bad mechanic. It may be a great mechanic for that network's economics, but correlate with usage. So what I would say there is, you have to look at the specifics of each project and say, well, yeah, when we talked about the product and what we thought this product was going to be used for and what we think it will be used for, okay, let's first understand that. And now let's say, okay, how can we measure the usage of this product? And it might be through stake tokens, if that is a direct correlation to you. It might be through another mechanic. It might be through some other sort of on-chain data, some sort of specific type of transaction. There's a million different ways to measure this. And the analogy is a little bit overwrought, but I try and bring it up in circumstances where I think it fits particularly well. Some of these questions around usage is like asking, what does it mean to use a website, right? And when you start thinking about that, you say, well, yeah, there's something in common with using a website, which is I'm making some sort of request to some server and I'm getting something back. But that's not really a helpful definition. You have to think about, well, when I use hopin.to, what does this mean? Well, it means I'm streaming video, I'm attending an event, okay, well, let's try and measure that metric and understand how people are using this website. Or if I'm using a news website, or I'm using Amazon.com, or I'm using whatever, instead of trying to measure HTTP requests as the metric for usage there, think about what the actual number is. And maybe it's, well, let's try and look at the GMV of Amazon here and understand how much is actually being bought on the platform and use that as the usage metric. So yeah, long-winded answer to your question, but yes, we're always looking at usage in networks that have launched, those that we've launched and those that we haven't launched, and trying to understand what are the best ways to measure usage for each specific network and how should that affect decision making in the future.
Zach, I want to switch a little bit here, the focus, and talk about airdrops, because those got a lot of attention. I know there's a lot of networks that are launched. People do airdrops onto them. In my discussions with the SEC, they've had inconsistent views sometimes about them, sometimes alluding to the fact that they think they might be securities offerings, sometimes not, and they've never really issued any guidance on it that I remember or can really tell. I have my own views that they're not securities offerings because someone's just dropping something on your network for free. And I think we've all maybe owned a token that you got an airdrop on and didn't even realize it, like especially some Ether. So Zach, what are you seeing with airdrops right now? And are you advising clients on that? And is it still something people are really, is it picking up? Is it lost steam? You know, what's happening with airdrops?
You know, I haven't heard much about airdrops in the last year, to be honest. So I'm not, I mean, from the regulatory standpoint, nothing has really changed on them, and that the SEC would view those as involving a sale, and depending on the characteristics of what you're airdropping, of course, likely the sale of a security. And so, you know, the act of airdropping itself is not necessarily regulated activity, right? It's what it is that you're putting in someone's wallet. And so the fact that something shows up in your wallet, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean that what showed up wasn't a security. It might have been given to you for free, and that's you know, the securities laws are there meant to protect you, and it's not just you, but it's also everyone who you may sell to down the line. And so it's not just about that initial person who ends up like getting 50 cents when they didn't have it before and thinks, oh, that's great, and then sells it, and then it suddenly goes down the line and, you know, spikes and crashes again. And that's really, you know, it's those people downstream that ultimately are the ones the securities laws are looking to account for in some way, a mechanism for. It's not necessarily that initial person who gets something for free, but it's you know, what is this thing? Do I have any information about it? Is anyone have any accountability for this thing they just put in my wallet? I mean, what does it do? I have no idea. What is the usage? And so there's you know, the securities laws are meant to protect or to provide information about and around those types of issues. They're not perfect in these types of scenarios, so there's definitely room for disagreement. But I think, you know, again, the act of airdropping, there might have been some inconsistencies you heard at the staff level, but I would say the vast majority of people in positions of influence there would say an airdrop is a sale. And if it's a sale of something that looks like an investment contract or security, then you're going to be in a regulated world when you interact with it. But I haven't seen much activity on them lately. I mean, honestly, you know, I've been focused more on a lot of people trying to figure out how to distribute the tokens. So that's kind of related to airdrops, but tokens that were sold maybe in the form of SAFs during a time when that was sort of more palatable, and now are getting ready to launch their network and are trying to figure out, well, how do I actually get these things into the hands of the people who purchased them, or maybe the people they sold it to? And what are the issues that abound around that? Because there are plenty there that people have to navigate. So those are some of the lingering effects from the last 3 or 4 years. But again, for the new projects, thankfully, most people are sort of have taken the learning of the last few years and are willing at least to engage on these issues when you build. And it's not this triage act that was really advising companies, not from a litigation standpoint, from a compliance standpoint, when it was effectively too late to sort of unbake the cake.
Zach, I know you were at Earn, so I'm going to airdrops kind of in your alley, and Earn, and Coinbase still has an Earn program, I think, somewhat. What are you seeing airdrops? I know you guys wouldn't. Do you have any tokens that started out as an airdrop on Coinbase? And have you seen them be as an effective way to basically launch a token?
So I think that, you know, to Zachary's point, it really is sort of a, you know, objective facts and circumstances type situation where, you know, every asset that we're going to list and that we're going to do an earn airdrop for goes through our legal framework. So we would not be, doing an earn campaign for an asset that we did not feel comfortable listing as a non-security in the U.S. on our trading platform. But what's interesting here is that I think there's been sort of an evolution in what an airdrop is. It used to be that you would have an Ethereum wallet and you would wake up the next day and end up with a few coins jingling in your pocket. And you would have no context on what these coins are and what they're used for. And Earn.com, which is the company I was at prior to Coinbase, really existed to solve that. And we've now integrated into Coinbase and launched close to 10 earn campaigns and have about $200 million worth of earn airdrops that are going out to our customers. And the important thing here is that it's not as if we're just taking these coins and dropping them into users' wallets. There's a huge educational component here in that in order to earn these coins, you go through and watch some informational videos that help explain what is this coin, how do I use it, what is it used for, and ultimately, why does this matter, right? And I think that if you think about the long-term vision of Coinbase, we want to be coin agnostic, right? A good example of this is stable coins, where we list USDC, we have listed DAI, and we're a partner in the Libra consortium. And it's becoming less the case that we want to have this editorial approach over which assets we list. Ultimately, we want to list all legally compliant and safe assets that exist. And there are, we believe, going to be thousands, tens of thousands, potentially millions of these over time. And with that, what becomes interesting is that this scarce sort of resource, it isn't getting a listing on Coinbase. It's educating potential users on what your token is and how to use it and why it matters. And so education is a core component now of a lot of the products that we're rolling out. And the other, I think, very powerful thing about Earn is that we're now starting to launch on-chain tasks. So we've launched 3 of these so far with Brave's basic attention token, the Orchid token, and also with Maker's DAI, where in order to earn the token, you have to actually go in and use the network, right? And we think that this is part of a broader shift of what we describe the investment phase of cryptocurrency, where folks are investing in cryptocurrency primarily is the main sort of application to ultimately using cryptocurrency. And so in the case of Maker, you would create a CDP and ultimately earn some DAI. In the case of Orchid and BAT, you would go ahead and download the browser. We would verify that you downloaded the browser or the VPN and used it. And then you would be able to earn tokens, which you can then go and use on the platform. And ultimately, we think this is going to evolve in interesting ways. It's possible we can verify that certain events have actually taken place on the Ethereum blockchain itself. And I think it's something that we're excited about because it's going to, we think, accelerate the transition to these assets being used globally.
So let's talk about at the end. We have a few minutes left, and one thing I want to ask you guys: what project are you most excited about right now? Just in terms of you're like, wow, that's a really interesting. Not that you're not in, they're all God's children. I get it, but what's one that has piqued your interest most recently? And Zach, I know you have clients, so I assume it's a client. But we're all proud of some of the clients we represent. I'm proud of some of mine, Block One, and I represent Arthur and Kathleen Brightman and their class actions in the Bay Area. So I'm proud to see the Tezos network really developing further. So Andi, why don't you tell us about some project you really thought was like, oh, this has some real promise or is of real interest? And then Zach Fallon and then Zach Siegel. Andi? Or Andy's frozen.
Why don't I jump in then?
Why don't you jump in? He's so stunned by this question that he can't even answer. He's got so many things to say.
Well, the projects I tend to enjoy are ones that are solving. It's not really about, from my perspective, the things that that brought me to this space aren't really. It's basically, you know, there are real world problems that that decentralization can solve. And one of the areas that I find really interesting is decentralized identification. So, you know, having those types of issues I find really interesting. And I find that if we can find ways that people can carry their credentials with them in a way that kind of disintermediates a lot of what we currently have, and are just the general friction points that we face as consumers, as citizens, as travelers. I find those issues fascinating, and we're fortunate to be working with some folks who are in that space. And so all of those types of real world things, not so much the financial, like, you know, I'm going to, you know, this thing's going to go to the moon, I'm going to make $1 million. I don't really care about that. I really care about trying to build solutions that are for the long term, and that sort of embrace a regulatory framework, but that at the same time, you know, push some of the real concerns of decentralization in a meaningful way back down to to you and me and everyone who's sort of walking around in their daily routine, and it just makes things more efficient, more easy. I can't hear you though, Brian. Sorry.
You on the spot. No, give us a name here. Is there one project that comes to mind for you, or I'm just curious if there isn't, it's fine. If they're under wraps still, whatever. But I'm just curious.
Oh yeah. I would say it's not. I'm not in a position yet to
okay.
There are plenty of people building in the space. I mean, just look it up. It's an active space, and rightly so, because it's ripe for improvement.
Andy, I don't know if you missed out because you froze and left.
No, I heard. I think I'm back.
All right.
Yeah, it is. It's a brutal question because they're all favorite children. But you know, I think I would just point to, we just ran token sale for a project called Celo, CELO, and we love Celo. I think what they're doing, and the reason that I think it's so interesting, is that they are trying to bring money, and reliable money, to everyone in the world, including the access to a stable financial system right now. And that to me is, I mean, first of all, just an incredibly altruistic goal, and has such clear positive effects on the world should it work. But what I think is so appealing, and this actually goes to what Zachary was just saying, they're doing it with crypto because crypto is actually the best solution for it. They're not doing it with crypto because crypto is cool. They're not doing it with crypto because crypto is the hot new thing. They're not doing it with crypto because you can raise a bunch of money with a token. They're doing it because crypto is a decentralized network, is actually the best way to bring global money into existence. And that to me is really powerful. So incredible goal, what I would say is correct application of crypto, and a really meaningful usage of the technology that's been developed and built to support this ecosystem. And then on top of that, just a phenomenal team, and they've been executing like crazy. And I think the last thing I would say there that I think is also exciting is, and we're seeing more of this now, I would say in the last year, a focus on user experience. And there's been a lot of amazing technical developments in crypto, and that's still, I would argue, probably the most important thing that continues to happen. But especially in kind of the first, maybe the first 5 or 7 years of crypto, no attention was paid to user experience. And now Celo is going out and saying, we're building a mobile wallet, it's mobile first, we're building the blockchain so that it supports mobile applications from the very beginning, because guess what? When you're building global money for every single person around the world, not everyone can set up a server rack and run a full. So big fan of that project, along with every other one that's been on CoinList, obviously.
Really difficult. A believer in privacy. So as far as existing networks go, any networks that are integrating that, so the Monero, Zcash, Decreds of the world, I find fascinating. But because this is focused on new networks that are coming to market, other than Celo, which I'm also really passionate about and love their mission, I find what Filecoin is doing fascinating. They have a huge developer community with IPFS. Obviously a really sort of successful fundraise, and there's just a lot of developer interest around that project. So excited to see that go live later.
All right, well, I did not put the mute on, so you all can hear me. Thank you guys very much for coming on board and talking this afternoon or this evening, depending on where you're at, or this morning if you're somewhere else in Asia. And we're going to step into the next panel in a minute. I'm thinking I'm going to take a brief break just to stretch my legs. So we'll be back in like a minute or two, everybody. Thanks, Zachary. Thanks,
Zach and Andy. See you guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Stay safe, everyone.